Hi, Liz.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to see you.
And you?
So today we are going live once again with SARSAS. So we've got Liz with us this evening. Do you want to explain a little bit about yourself and your role at SARSAS and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm one of the new trainers at SARSAS. We've got a brand new training team, delivering training, pretty self-explanatory. I've got a background as an IDVA, which is an independent domestic violence advisor. And yeah, we're just going to chat a little bit about, we've just got some questions about healthy relationships, sort of red flags, and just a bit like that. But it's only half an hour, so it's going to be a nice little overview, I think.
Yeah, so we've been coming on here. This is our second live so far. We're going to be doing them weekly, just around an interesting topic, talking about some things that might be useful to people, a bit of information sharing and awareness raising. So like Liz said, today we're talking about all things healthy and unhealthy relationships. Hopefully you guys find this useful. So let's go straight into it. What are some of the features of an unhealthy relationship that we might not think of as unhealthy?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with things that are maybe slightly more obvious, but still hard to detect, but slightly more obvious, and then go into the things which actually a lot of people don't realize are unhealthy or abusive. So obviously things that can be obvious are things like controlling behaviors, so controlling what you wear. This one, might creep into a relationship without you actually realizing, but saying, you can't wear that, that's too short, or that's too low cut, or you can't wear that, that's too tight, things like that. Controlling where you go, maybe controlling your friends, saying your friends aren't good for you, you can't hang out with that group of people, and then maybe things like controlling the finances as well. And then we've got things like envy or jealousy, or really extreme envy or jealousy. And we're not saying that you're not allowed to be jealous, because that's a completely natural feeling and everyone feels jealous at times, but it depends on how they use this jealousy. So are they using the jealousy to try and control you and say what you can wear, where you can go, and does it feed into that cycle of sort of coercive control? And then we've got love bombing. This can be hard to detect as well, but this is basically where your partner sort of bombs you with a over the top amount of like affection, flattery, gifts, praise. And it can happen in any part of a relationship, but often it can happen early on in the relationship, and it happens so they can sort of win over your attention, and this is with the purpose of being able to control you. So really it's an attempt to try and influence you by demonstrating attention towards you and affection towards you, and it can turn into a form of emotional abuse. And then we've got gaslighting, so like you're so emotional, you're so over the top, you're so dramatic, and that can be, sometimes it can be easy to spot, but a lot of the time it can be really, really hard to actually realize that we're being gaslit. And then another thing which I thought I'd include, because a lot of people don't realize that this is actually a form of relationship abuse and is either psychological or emotional abuse, because a lot of the time we hear about sexual abuse, but we don't actually hear about withholding sex or withholding affection, and this can be really manipulative, especially if it's done in a way, I don't want to have sex with you because you've done something wrong, or I don't want to show you affection because I want to show you that I'm annoyed with you. Particularly if this is repeatedly done, this can be a form of psychological and emotional abuse, and like I said, it can be really manipulative. And then the last few things, we've got moving quickly in a relationship. So this can be it's not always a red flag, but this can be a really big red flag if someone's like, we want to put a label on it, we're exclusive, we're gonna get married, move in together, have kids, and it's like all feels really rushed. And especially if maybe you haven't left each other's side since the relationship started, and it might end up in you like being isolated from your friends and family. So that's often one to watch out for. And relationships can like feel like a whirlwind, particularly in the first couple of months or whatever, but it's definitely important to keep an eye out for that. But then most importantly, I just think a red flag or something unhealthy in a relationship is any situation where you feel that you're walking on eggshells, or you feel like you don't want to rock the boat because you're scared of the consequences. You might worry that if you're bringing up problems, you'll provoke tension, and then that ends up in you maybe becoming conflict avoidant, or you keep issues to yourself. And it's just really important to know that in a healthy relationship, we should be able to discuss anything with our partners, and we should have open communication channels without fear, full stop. So yeah, that's the most important thing to remember, I think.
Cool. That was a lot of good hints and tips there.
Yeah.
And it's hard, isn't it? Because, you know, every relationship's different. And like you said a minute ago, you know, it's not always an unhealthy relationship, but it's like noticing and then like sort of, you know, keeping on top of it. Is this getting a bit extreme? Is this going a little bit too far? I think what also, just to note, what we probably should have said at the start of this is there might be some triggering topics discussed in this Facebook Live. So if it is too triggering for you, trigger warning.
Sorry.
Just sign off if it's a bit too much, but it's good to raise awareness and share, isn't it? Yeah, some really good points there. So moving on, sometimes people think of abusive relationships that can just be physical abuse. I think quite a lot of people tend to have this misconception when we talk about unhealthy relationships. So is there sort of more to that, do you think?
Definitely. And I mean, this like is really, really common, particularly my clients that I worked with. They would always think, well, you know, I'm not being hit, so I'm not in an abusive relationship. And that is absolutely not the case. There are quite a few types of abuse. So obviously you have got physical, and that's a valid form of abuse, and that's things like hitting, kicking, spitting. But we actually have, I think, 5 or 6 others. So we've got sexual abuse, obviously, so that's like rape, that's sexual assault, non-consensual activities, and that can include things like revenge porn, threats of revenge porn as well. And then we've got financial. So this can be literally, this is on a massive spectrum. So this can be anything from making you work all the hours under the sun and saying, you know, you've got to have 2 jobs and you've got to provide for me, and I'm going to sit at home and do nothing, and like you're really exhausting yourself from working really hard. Or it can be completely stopping you from working, and saying, you know, you're not going to have any access to your own finances, you're not going to have freedom to be financially independent, or anywhere in between. It's a really big spectrum. And then we've got emotional and psychological abuse, and these terms are often used interchangeably, and people think they're the same thing. They are quite similar, but I think the key way to remember it is emotional abuse makes you feel sad, but psychological abuse makes you feel mad. So emotional abuse is things maybe like name calling, embarrassing you in front of your friends, you know, saying you're really fat, you're really ugly, just making you feel rubbish. But psychological abuse is more of that gaslighting, you know, telling you something didn't happen when it did, telling you they're only acting in a certain way because they love you. And then we've got digital, which is a fairly like newer category, and it can fit into all the other types of abuse really. But that might be things like, you know, revenge porn. So that could be sexual abuse and digital abuse, might be using technologies to stalk you, abuse you, harass you. It's particularly now when we've got things like Find My Friends, you know, they might set it up without you realizing, and then turn it up where you are, and you have no idea that can be digital abuse. But I would just say the one thing to look at is it's a really good resource. It's called The Power and Control Wheel, by someone called Duluth. And I think a lot of people in like sort of the abuse sector know about it. It is a good resource. You can literally just Google it and see all these types of abuse that we might not realize are abuse, and other than physical. So yeah,
definitely. There's so much more than just physical, isn't there? Like even the digital is probably one people haven't heard of before. But, you know, if they're being used, for the wrong purpose, then.
And it particularly with young people, it's so like normalized now that you don't actually realize that might be digital abuse. It might be things like forcing you when you get home from school to FaceTime them for like 5 hours and like show what you're doing and show where you're going. That is digital abuse, but unfortunately it's been really normalized, so people don't realize that.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much that goes on, and just to reiterate, like that every relationship is different, and you know there's spectrums to all of it. So it's about like taking it into context, isn't it? Taking it into your own context, evaluating your own situation, But yeah, really good pointers there. Thank you. And just also before we carry on, if anyone has any questions, if you're watching, just pop them in the comments and we'll like answer them as we go through. We'll answer them all at the end. But please do ask any questions especially while Liz is here, and we can pick her brains at things. So just sort of like following on from the abuse sort of topic, I guess, something we all often hear people say is that phrase of, why don't they just leave? Which is a really damaging phrase to use. So sort of like unpicking that a bit, why is that damaging? And
there's like,
it's not just that simple, is it?
I know, there's like, when I was looking at this question, I was like, there's literally probably like a million things I could say, but I think I'll just cover the main points and just like blur out everything that
go for it.
Firstly, abusive behaviors can be, like I've discussed earlier, can be really normalized in our society. We see things on social media, we see things on TV, they're sending me 100 texts a day, checking up on me, asking what I'm doing, where I'm going, but that's because they love me, because that's what I've been told on social media. I mean, there's that film on Netflix, I think it's like 365 days. I haven't seen it, but I think
I saw a bit of that. I had to turn it off.
Yeah, and it's like, and then people were tweeting like, but he kidnaps her because he loves her, and it's just like, what? So all of this stuff like makes it really hard to recognize that we're even in an abusive relationship, full stop. So that could be one barrier to prevent us from leaving. Another thing is our self-worth. So any form of abuse is going to have a huge impact on someone's confidence, on someone's self-esteem, on their self-worth, and it may just make them feel that they don't have the confidence to leave. Something we hear a lot from perpetrators is, no one else would want you, no one else would put up with you. And if you're being told that every day, or you're being told you're worthless, that what you do has no meaning, all of this is something that we internalize, and then that's going to be really hard to get the confidence and the self-worth to leave that relationship, because you've just been so worn down. Another thing to remember, and a lot of people tend to overlook this, is that abusers aren't abusive 100% of the time. When we look at like the cycle of abuse, it's like someone's not constantly being abused all day every day. There might be times in an abusive relationship where the relationship's going really well, and actually you might feel really, really in love with your partner, and you think, I don't want to leave you because I love you, and that's completely valid. And despite the abuse going on, that still happens. And people often forget that we can be in love with the people who abuse us, and this is enough to make us stay. So I think that's something that's definitely overlooked.
Because like with that, I think people tend to, you can wait for it, can't you? If you know that there's really good periods where you're happy and you're content, sometimes you might just wait it out, because that period might come again. It's that whole, like you said, it's that whole cycle, isn't it? Like,
exactly. And even the hope that they might change, that might keep you in a relationship. So definitely. And I think as well, so shame and embarrassment is a big one, because this idea that we might have in our head of perpetrators, being like really shady people that like everyone knows they're horrible people, and they go around their communities and they sort of terrorize people. This is actually can be really different to the reality of perpetrators. Some perpetrators are really well respected in their community. They're really well liked. They might have high flying jobs. They might have things where they really help people, and because of this is precisely really because they can be really charming and really manipulative, and this prevents people firstly from recognizing what they're going through as abuse, and secondly it isolates them, because they think, well, no one's going to believe me, this is a really high-flying person, they help a lot of people, maybe they do charity work, they do church work, all of this stuff, and that you just think, if I come out, that people aren't going to believe me, or they're not going to support me, or they might turn a blind eye to it because their position in the community is so important. And because of this, they're going to feel really ashamed. They're going to feel really embarrassed and try to make excuses and maybe cover up the abuse. So that's a big one.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like you're saying there, it's not that one type fits all kind of perpetrator. And I think sometimes we can forget, there's not one kind, this isn't what an abusive person looks like. They can come in all different forms, shapes, sizes, different types of people. So it's
There's
looking out
no
for the
typical-
behaviors, isn't it? It's
Exactly, and like it's just the same as there's no typical victim, like there's no typical
yeah, of
perpetrator
course,
or
yeah.
abuser, and like we often think like, oh yeah, I could spot an abuser a mile off, like, but you can't. It's so hard, and you would
Yeah,
not believe some of the positions these like perpetrators have in society.
definitely, yeah.
And also it's super dangerous to leave relationships in some situations. This might completely escalate the situation, and in many cases has unfortunately resulted in domestic homicide, which is the partner killing them. Leaving a relationship is one of the most high risk times in a relationship, and I actually found a statistic. It said 41% of women killed by a partner, or so this is a male partner or former partner, in England, Wales or Northern Ireland in 2018 had separated or taken steps to separate from them. So that's 41%. Wow. Yeah, really worrying.
Massive,
and it is
isn't
a
it?
really high risk time, because it really makes the perpetrator sort of ramp up that abuse and think, you're not leaving me, I'm not going to let you leave me.
Yeah.
And then finally, I just wanted to talk a bit about coercive control. So it can be really hard to escape this cycle of coercive control, particularly if that person's maybe controlling your finances. You might not have the money to escape. Like I said, with financial abuse, you might not be able to work, or they might have control of your bank account or your universal credit. You might not have any money to your name in order to physically leave, or alternatively, they might have isolated you from your friends and family, so you might have no one to rely on. So they're the sort of main things that I think is important to mention with leaving a relationship.
And I think they're really important. It's a really important thing to touch on, because I think it's a question that a lot of women get asked, and it's never as simple as just leave, for a million and one other reasons, a lot of which you just spoke there. And even relating it back to the types of abuse that we were talking about at the start, if someone's financially abusing you, you might not have any means to leave. They might be in charge of all your credit cards. Their signatures might be on everything that you own. If you leave, they're potentially making yourself homeless in some situations. And for a lot of women, that's really dangerous. And a lot
especially
of women
with the housing crisis.
Exactly, yeah.
It's super hard.
Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons, isn't there? And I think it's really good to highlight them, and everyone be a bit more considerate and supportive towards each other when you are in those situations. And if you do have friends or family or people that that you think might be in abusive relationships, it is, be there for them and give them that empathy, and know that it's not as simple as just leave.
And really, yeah, exactly. And realize questions like that have a lot of judgment behind them, and
exactly,
prevent someone from coming forward and
isolate them even more. If people feel judged, then they might start not coming to you for advice. They might not tell you things, potentially isolating themselves even more. So yeah, be careful out there, guys. But I just wanted to go back to what you said a minute ago. You said the word coercive control. That's a word that some people might have heard of, some people might not have. Tell us more about coercive control.
Yes, so coercive control is either an act or an instant, or like a pattern of instants or a pattern of acts, which basically assault, threat, humiliate, intimidate, or make someone feel inferior to a perpetrator. Or it can also be abuse that is sort of used to harm, punish, frighten a victim. And it basically, what we're doing is we're looking for things that create an unequal power dynamic in a relationship, and either make you dependent on the perpetrator or make you feel inferior to the perpetrator. And basically, it's controlling behavior is designed to make that person dependent on them. So it isolates them from their support. You might be exploiting them, depriving them of independence, and basically regulating their behavior. So it is a criminal offence. It is a form of relationship abuse. It was made a criminal offence in 2015. And if we look at some examples, it might be things like depriving you from access to support service. So maybe saying you can't go to the doctor, you can't go to the dentist, you can't go and see, your nurse and trust worker, and really isolating you from your friends, your family. It might be putting you down constantly, saying you're unattractive, saying you're worthless, saying you're ugly. It could be humiliating you, degrading you, any sort of dehumanization. And that can be either alone. It might be oh God, you look really fat and horrible in that. I can't believe you're thinking about going outside in that. Or it might be in front of a group of friends. And particularly when we look at young people, maybe in school, or maybe, going out to the pub with their friends, it might be things like saying in front of a group of friends, like, who'd want to have sex with you? You've got loads of STIs. Something that is really embarrassing. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't have to be true. It can really sort of degrade you and make you feel really worthless. And then it builds that sort of cycle of dependence. And again, when we're looking at young people, it could be things which unfortunately, again, is normalized. Logging into your social media, asking for your passwords, getting upset when you spend time with friends and saying, if you love me, you would spend more time with me. And all this can feed into the cycle of coercive control. But again, if you check the power and control wheel, if you just Google that and have a look at it, there's a whole range of actions that can feed into coercive control. And it's a huge, it's a really big,
it's huge spectrum. It's a big it's a big like overarching theme, like it encompasses a lot, is what I'm trying to say, doesn't it? Coercive control can mean a lot of different things, but I think it's good to note what you said. It's did you say it's a criminal offense, coercive control? So, and that's really good for everyone to remember as well. And I didn't know it was a criminal offence myself. I should have.
Obviously, it's hard to prove because a lot of the time it can happen one-on-one. But if you think you are going through it, you can make a log of it. You can say what you're going through and just keep a note of it. And there are prosecutions for coercive control, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to note as well. That like, if you find yourself in one of these situations, or someone does, one of the best things you can do, along with a million other things, is jot them down, jot everything down, note it all down, take logs of it, do what you can for evidence.
And even if it's things like stuff. And if you're like working with a professional, it might be, I had clients that used to screenshot like what happened, send it to me, and then I would save it, and then you could delete it off your phone. So if you've got a friend or a family member you trust, things like that. Evidence is key with coercive control charges, as
and keeping yourself safe with it. Like you said, that's a good way to keep yourself safe as well, having it off your phone, but someone else has got a record of it. Because first things first is keeping ourselves as safe as we can, isn't it? So we've spoken a lot. Actually, we've called this healthy relationships, but we've spoken a lot about unhealthy relationships. But what's good is, unhealthy relationships, then the flip side is the healthy relationship, obviously. We don't want this long list of things. But where can people, so we've just briefly touched on some things today. Can we just actually go back to the gaslighting? Because you mentioned it earlier, but I think that's a good term that a lot of people are probably hearing or have heard of, that might not quite know what it is.
Sorry, I should have broke that down when I spoke about it. But basically, it happens. So gaslighting happens when someone tries to control you by sort of twisting your sense of reality, or making you doubt yourself, or making you feel like maybe you didn't remember something correctly. And like I said earlier, it can be really, really hard to spot because it is so subtle, and because it is so manipulative. But it might be things, so common sayings that we could hear with gaslighting is, that never happened, I never said that, you're so dramatic, you're so emotional, you're overreacting, maybe your memory is so bad, you need to go and get your head checked, you're crazy, I'm not the only one that thinks it, all of my mates think you're crazy. All of this sort of things that can make you think, did I remember that right? Or maybe I am the stupid one, maybe I do need to go to the doctors, like maybe I'm not mentally well. All of this stuff, anything that makes you doubt yourself, basically.
Cool, thanks for that. And again, like I know we've said it a few times, obviously context is important. Like some of these things you might find in any relationship, the odd comments here and there. The context is really important. What else is going on in that relationship? How much is it happening? What situation am I in? Just to go on that again. So we've spoken a lot about some great topics. Where can people sort of learn more? If they've listened to this today, some of it was really interesting, or some of it might have resonated. Where can we have a look for a bit more information?
So obviously, SARSAS, you can go on our website. We've got like self-help booklets. You've got loads of information. You can go on our Instagram. I think we're putting out a little healthy relationship series. We often put out like little bits and bobs, which is like educational for relationships. Like I said, we've got a training team. So if you're a professional watching and you want to get some more training, then you can come to us. But obviously there's so many resources out there, like things like Women's Aid, or you could just Google and literally you can get so much advice about healthy relationships, and anything that's sort of charity based and, you know, works with domestic abuse or sexual abuse, and you know it's like a good organization. They pretty much have loads of information on their website. For young people, they can look at places like the Hideout, and I know Women's Aid have like a young people section as well. So there's so much information online to learn.
There's a lot of resources out there now, isn't there, which is amazing. And also I think, you know, with charities, we do signpost a lot to others, so, you know, just go somewhere and hopefully people will point you in the right direction, even as simple as going to your GP or you know, Mind, a mental health charity, anything like that, and hopefully you'd like to think that you get pointed in the right direction for the sort of like right
even
information.
Even pharmacists, people are trained now to be able to do this stuff, so definitely.
So sorry, I've kind of jumped a bit ahead. Where can we go for support? I guess that's sort of the same as where can we learn more?
I mean, like, we are, especially for Bristol and Somerset, we are really lucky. Obviously it's not great that we have the demand for these services, but we are lucky in the amount of services that we have. So obviously there's SARSAS and there's the Survivor Pathway for sexual abuse. You can go on the Survivor Pathway website and just pick your area, and it shows you all of the resources, all the support available in your area. So you've got BAVA, I think, or BAVA, which is Bristol Against Violence and Abuse. That's a really, really good website. So you can sort of go on the website and pick whether it's like forced marriage or whether it's sexual abuse, relationship abuse. You can pick what you think you're experiencing, and they will link you to all of the organisations in Bristol and Baines that will be able to support you. Obviously, you've got NextLink and SafeLink as well, which is the IDVA and ISVA service, which is a sexual violence advisor. 125 for sex workers, which is an amazing service. There's also an organisation called OPOKA, which is, I don't know what it stands for, or OPOKA, but it's basically an Eastern European family support service and supports Eastern European families, women, children who are going through domestic abuse. And then Karma Nirvana, which is specifically for forced marriage and so-called honor-based violence support, which is a really good organisation. And obviously the Nelson Trust as well.
Obviously.
And like Sophie said as well, like literally going to your GP, going to the pharmacist, or all professionals should be able to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, and as well, you know, the internet's a great place. You can find, obviously, SARSAS are Bristol based, so that's quite a lot of Bristol organisations. But if you just go online, type in the right words, and there's so many great organisations out there across the whole of the UK, England, Wales, to just have a Google, and hopefully you'll end up in the right place.
And there's like Women's Aid helpline and like National Centre for Domestic Violence Refuge. There's so many. If you just search domestic abuse, you get literally thousands of hits, which is fab.
Yeah, which is great. Fab. Thanks so much for chatting. I know that was a lot of it. That was a lot of information. I don't think we have any questions in the comments section.
Oh, that's
good. Fire any random questions at you. But if anyone does have any questions or comments, feel free to comment in the box after, or drop us a private message. And obviously, if anything we've spoken about has sort of triggered you or resonated with you, then please do get in touch with either ourselves at the Nelson Trust or SARSAS or anyone else to help support you. Thanks so much, Liz.
No worries.
For your wealth of knowledge or breadth of knowledge. And thanks for chatting. And we'll be back again next week. I can't remember what the topic is next week, but we'll be talking about something else.
Something interesting.
Sharing some wisdom and raising awareness. So yeah, please come back next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Liz.